Hello and welcome to Azur Lane Meta. If after this video you want to help support the channel, please check out my affiliate store at kit.co/AzurLaneMeta. Welcome back, guys. Today we are going to be doing something that I've had in the works for a little while. Finally, in the exercise guide that I've built for PvP, the fleet composition ranking is complete. It has been on the coming soon section for many months now, and I finally completed it. However, I completed it one day before PR4 dropped. If you've watched any of my PR4 videos, then you know that I am highly confident that PR4 will make an impact in PvP in the coming year. So I was left with a couple of options. I could do the video now without PR4. I could wait several months until people get PR4 ships up to dev level 25 and dev level 30 and then make the video then, or I could do what I'm actually going to do. I am fairly confident that these 3 ships in PR4 will make an impact in PvP. However, nobody has them yet, and it will be 6 to 9 months before people have dev level 30 DR ships. Anchorage people will have a little bit quicker. So the point is, I don't want to put them in the current PvP lists because they're not being used right now. So this list today will only encompass ships that you'll see in if you were to start next PvP season. However, I have to note these 3 ships to get you guys prepared for getting them. Azur, Anchorage, and Shinaryuu, I think, have the potential to make an impact. Anchorage and Azur much more than Shinaryuu, but I will talk about that later. So as I go through the different fleet compositions, none of them will have these new PR4 ships in them. However, I will mention them where I think they will have a chance at being a replacement. So here we go. Let's open up and start with what I think the best fleet composition is, which is the Italian fleet, which right now is really just running Aquila, maybe Veneto. So these are our core components, and the Veneto is actually more optional than you'd think, but definitely Aquila is required. And the reason we call it Italian is because it has the Veneto boost. When they don't have the Veneto boost, I typically put it in a different fleet composition. And I think right now, Veneto boosting Aquila, that 12% for the hit as well as the aviation, makes a difference in making sure that your preloaded Aquila is top notch. These are our 5 most common variants. The most popular variant today, and probably the most powerful in my opinion, is the Mafia fleet with New Jersey. We call it because New Jersey is the state with the most Italian Americans. And then of course the Italian part. The US and Italy being the 2 countries that have the Mafia in them. That's kind of the reason we call it Mafia. But the point is, we have New Jersey, who is just an absolute boss of a ship with the ability to have preloaded Aquila and an early strike Veneto. We'll talk more about Vanguard options in a second, but let me get through the 4 other variants. The modern sniper variant is anything with Warspite. Really, I call this anything with Aquila and Warspite. However, Veneto will help Aquila get more reveal. You could also run Perseus here, but basically you want to have Warspite be able to target carriers. After the most recent carrier update with the hidden carrier mechanic, Warspite was not able to snipe. Now she is, so we call it modern sniper when Warspite is being able to target carriers that are revealed by another ship. It's going to be either Perseus or Aquila that's usually doing it, but in this case, we're going to be using the Italian sniper, which is Aquila, Veneto, and Warspite. This is the fleet that I use to get my Admiral of the Navy end of season challenge. Very useful. It is fantastic for attack fleets. Then there's also the Mediterranean fleet. This is focusing on France and Italy, kind of controlling the Med. And Shinaryuu having a bunch of fire and preloaded, and then Veneto coming in at 80% and Aquila revealing everybody. Your opponent's Vanguard is going to be shot down very quickly. The point of this fleet with the Mediterranean fleet is to kill an opponent's Vanguard very quickly and then focus on the backline, whatever they may be. You might actually run double HE guns here, although I like in this particular comp running Veneto with the 457 and then the Mark 7 rainbow gun on Shinaryuu. But you could run double HE guns and also, using Aquila with the new German planes, you can take out that Vanguard really quick and then move on to the backline. Additionally, there is the Axis factions where we run FDG, double Italian backline, and usually a Japanese front line. So we have all 3 Axis factions. This one's kind of falling out of favor because FDG in PvP is not as good as New Jersey. But using FDG gives you a little bit more flexibility in the Vanguard to use the Japanese ships instead of the US ships. However, the US ships in the Vanguard have gotten very good very recently. And so this Axis variant of the Italians is not as popular, but certainly relevant if you didn't pick up a New Jersey. Finally, there's the early strike variant. This is when we run Perseus Aquila. We'll talk more about this later when we get into preload comps, but effectively there is the Italian preloaded comp, or what I like to call the Italian early strike. Veneto at 80% works very well with this. So let's talk about Vanguard options, but one thing before we get down, I'll show you all the different options. One of the things I note is Veneto wants to be at 80% reduction in her cooldown. Aquila accounts for one of the Italians. Now you could run Marco Polo as well for a total Italian variant here, but largely we're gonna get our third Italian ship, because Veneto counts herself, from the Vanguard. So we do need to run 1 Italian ship in the Vanguard to get maximum potential out of Veneto. So these are what I'd say the 7 best options for the Vanguard right now if we're excluding PR4. Of course, Anchorage would definitely be in here, no doubt about it. A gear could be in here for like non-Mafia fleets, so we're talking like the Axis function or maybe a Mediterranean version, but not for particularly Mafia fleets. So Abruzzi is going to be your number 1 option for being that 3rd Italian slot, and she is a really good ship, but she's primarily used for torpedoes. So one of the things that you could run, especially if you're going to be using a Mediterranean version or a sniper version, is you're going to kind of run maybe a torpedo aggro. Abruzzi can get boosted by Noshiro and Jinsu. Those are probably the best options to put with her, and then you'll have a torp meme Vanguard that will be able to snipe down whoever it wants. If you want to run Modern Sniper with Warspite, or if you want to run the Mediterranean fleet with Richelieu, you will be able to take out Vanguards very quickly, especially since Abruzzi is going to be buffed by Veneto in addition to Noshiro and Jinsu. Outside of running torp memes, we pretty much going to run Juno. She's one of the best ships in PvP. There's no reason not to run her, especially if you're running Mafia. She gets even tankier than before with a 5% damage reduction as well as 15% extra AA. She also triggers New Jersey. Note, New Jersey does require another USS ship, so we do need to put a USS ship in the Vanguard. Juno fits that role perfectly. Now we have 3 alternative options here. Seattle is a very popular option amongst top PvP players right now. Putting Seattle with Juno and Abruzzi is probably the most common Mafia fleet that you will see until Anchorage gets to be reliably leveled. Seattle has the perfect bonus of having a main gun +1 or an anti-air gun +1. She has a good stats in terms of her HP and anti-air. She's light armor, so she's not susceptible to those torpedoes. She has 15% damage reduction when she's put in the back. She gets the 5% damage reduction from New Jersey, of course, as well as the 15% AA enhancement. And probably most importantly, and why you need her at Fate Simulated +5 for her to be relevant, is she gets her bonuses for the whole battle from the start of the battle because PvP is considered air parity. Seattle is probably one of the best all-around tanks in being able to deal with aviation damage as well as shelling damage as well as torpedo damage. She's not the best in any slot, but she's really good in all 3 of them. New Jersey really brought her to the scene out of nowhere. We have 2 other side options. Like I said, the most common for the Mafia fleet is going to be Juno, Abruzzi, Seattle. The most common for the Mediterranean fleet would be Noshiro, Abruzzi, Jinsu. And a lot of other fleets are going to run like Noshiro, Abruzzi, Juno. But we do have 2 other options. Yuka Kaze also makes her way in here, and I can tell you, I've used her. She's really nice. We thought she might be taken out of the meta because she doesn't do as well as some other ships against aviation damage. However, she does good enough, and she is absolutely a good counter to New Jersey. New Jersey, with that low spread and everything, is going to target her, and she's really fast. She has 25% chance to negate all that damage, get rid of that armor break, all that stuff. Yuka Kaze is really annoying if you're running a Mafia fleet, if you have to deal with her, and she starts proccing her skill. So I definitely, in times when I was running like a modern sniper fleet against a Mafia fleet that was built properly and is hard to kill, like the New Jersey, you can run a Yuka Kaze and just win the stall battle sometimes. I really do like her. I know a lot of people aren't going to particularly use her very much, but she is always an option if your opponent is just sniping you too much. Does well against torps too. The 7th ship on here is probably a ship that most of you have never heard of. Malstrale. Unfortunately, with Anchorage's new skill, Malstrale has become more obsolete, but she's still relevant now. She's a great option for Mafia fleets. I like using her. Of course, Abruzzi most of the time is going to be your option for your Italian ship. However, we do have to look at more options from the Italian side. I don't like Pola or Zara very much in PvP, so we're going to be left with Malstrale. Malstrale has a very unique skill. She's able to drop a smokescreen when a different ship in the fleet takes damage. Your ships are taking damage all the time. Her smokescreen comes out very early. And before Anchorage was a ship, Susutsuki and her were the only two ships that could reliably drop a smokescreen early on in the battle to deal with torp memes as well as Acula. Malstrale acts very similarly to how I would say Eldridge is. She's not really used for anything other than her really strong stall component skill. Malstrale happens to be Italian though, so she does meet the Veneto requirement. Although I would say Eldridge is probably a little bit better, but once again, we are locked into having at least one Italian Vanguard if we're going to run Veneto. I think with Anchorage, you're going to run Anchorage instead for that early smokescreen, and then you're going to run Abruzzi to help get that DPS on the Vanguard a little bit. But I did like her as an option, and I have leveled mine to test her out. She's pretty decent. Really annoying, actually, to fight against. So those are my Vanguard options here. Really, the requirements are that you have to have one USS ship if you're going to run the Mafia variant, and all variants you're going to have at least one Italian ship. Let's move on to the next one. The next variant is the Shinaryuu, which was the meta before the Italian event came out. It consisted of Shinano and Hiryu. In the month before the Italian event came out, there was not a way that you could get Admiral of the Navy without running into his fleet. This fleet was everywhere. Shinano buffing Hiryu, Hiryu having the 15 seconds invincibility. This fleet has a ton of damage, and with Wyverns, they only have more damage, with the crash damage as well as just so brutal. However, this fleet does have a little bit of weakness to the Italian fleet, and since the Italian fleet is so popular right now, this fleet is a little bit weaker. However, I don't think you can count it out yet. It pretty much beats everything else other than the Italian fleets, and if there is any sort of counter to the Italians, this fleet might make a comeback. Remember, they can use things like Anchorage in the Vanguard to counter Italian fleets. So let's look at our variants here. One that most people like is Nagato for her 20% damage boost. This variant I don't like as much. Nagato is not really a ship you want tanking damage from the backline. The 20% damage boost is very nice, but Nagato has kind of been power crept a little bit in her ability with only a 40% chance to proc a barrage that is pretty standard on most modern battleships. However, what I like to do more often is run the triple carrier variant. One of the reasons this wasn't used over the Nagato variant early on in this composition's development is because most people only had one, maybe two Wyverns. Now as people work up to 3 or 4 Wyverns, we now can give Wyverns to all of our carriers, and that is very important, so we can run a triple carrier fleet. Shokaku being the best variant, she can boost the damage by 10%. She will go right before Shinano, right before Hiryu. This allows you to run the fleet command, giving a damage increase to aviation damage and a damage decrease to shelling damage. Shinano is going to buff Hiryu and Shokaku. Shokaku is going to buff Hiryu and Shinano. And then, Hiryu is going to be the survival component. The downside here is getting someone sniped. Shinano is certainly not immortal to a sniper like Warspite. This means you probably want to put your Shinano in the middle, which means your Shokaku is vulnerable. And anytime, one of these ships is vulnerable, that means that you're going to be fighting a 5-on-6 potentially against the sniper fleet. That's kind of a problem. That's one of the reasons this has been so brutal when it's fighting against Italian snipers. That being said, if you get your airstrikes off, if all 3 of your backlines survive, and that's much easier to do on the attack fleet when the defending fleet has a damage reduction, you are going to sweep through a ton of ships. If you can get to your 22 second mark and get that airstrike off, you are going to be golden. You're probably going to win that match. Note, I do want to say for this triple carrier variant, Hakuryu is an obvious option to replace Shokaku. It could also potentially replace Hiryu, although I personally like Hiryu. But if we're focusing on, just getting that huge amount of damage right off the bat in that first airstrike, then maybe you drop Hiryu. But I really particularly like 15 seconds invincibility for some defense. But you could min-max for the offensive capabilities. This is where I'd see Hakuryu become relevant. And really the only place I see Hakuryu potentially being relevant to PvP is in this slot. There's also the Weeb fleet. This incorporates New Jersey, of course, American, Japanese, I think you get the name. New Jersey is just so strong. New Jersey in the Weeb fleet with an evasion equipped setup will allow you to actually survive some snipes. Hiru will be on the other end, so she'll be invincible, making her impossible to snipe before her airstrike goes off. And Shinano can be protected in the middle. The Weeb fleet actually works very nicely. I think a lot of people are really hyped on Acula, but New Jersey's very good as well with the Japanese. So I'd recommend trying out the Weeb fleet as well. It works nicely. You just put Shinano in the middle, which defends her against snipes, and she'll get to launch, guaranteed. It'll be a nice time. One variant that I see around, but I don't think is particularly good, is traditional sniper Warspite. The reason we call that is because none of the carriers will launch before the 10-second mark, meaning that she will have her snipe be on the farthest away ship that's not a carrier. I really don't like having a sniper that's blind. It can work because battleships are not dead. A lot of people are using battleships in PvP right now, New Jersey being a primary option for that. So she will get to snipe New Jersey. Some people just think that's enough. They don't need to have any of the scouters for her. I don't like it, but I do see it a lot, so I will put it here. Let's move on to the different Vanguard options. We have a lot of choices here, but once again, if we're going to run Nagato, we're going to want to look for IJN Vanguards in order to get that extra boost. Shinano does boost the IJN destroyers, so that's, relevant. But for the most part, we are free to choose most things here. Juno being a near tier 0 ship in PvP, we're going to probably play her. If you are playing the Weeb version, you have to play Juno. It's just required. And if you aren't playing that version, you probably still want to play her. Yukikaze is a great option, especially if you're worried about Mafia Fleet. It can dodge New Jersey pretty well. It can dodge Veneto pretty well. And if you're a little bit lucky, maybe she'll dodge some airstrikes. Azuma is a good tank. Of course, with Nagato, she gets buffed so she can have a little bit more consistency up front. However, I think this would be a perfect place to replace her with a gear whenever people get that up to Dev 25 or Dev 30. You are going to lose Nagato's boost. However, I don't think Nagato is the best variant to put with Shinaryuu, so we're just going to use probably a gear here instead of Azuma once a gear comes out. On top of this, we have Torp memes. Torp memes always work really well. Noshiro Naganami Jinsu, fantastic still. You can run that with Nagato to get that extra boost. Torp memes still can win. Like, against Mafia Fleets, they can still take the cake here. They will severely be decreased in their potency when Anchorage gets to be popular, but as of right now, you can use your torpedo memes to win plenty of battles. I know plenty of people running Mafia Fleets who have lost battles on the attack, on the offensive, against defensive Torp memes. If they crit and they hit right, you'll be fine. There are two other ships that I want to mention here. Suzutsuki is an option here. Before Anchorage was a thing, Suzutsuki reliably put a smokescreen at the 3-second mark. This unfortunately means that you're not going to be able to be under the smokescreen for that first torpedo. However, that will mean that you will be under that smokescreen for usually the second and definitely the third wave of torpedoes. If you're going against an opponent's Torp meme fleet, that could be relevant because while you might not have the first wave blocked, you will have defenses against the second, the third, potentially the fourth. Acula's planes will probably get there before 3 seconds, but if they're running slower planes, you could, it's close. There's a little wiggle room there. It was somewhat of a counter to Preloaded, Torps, and Acula. On top of that, she is a firepower destroyer that's not bad at all, and getting buffed on that firepower from Shinano is really nice synergy. I like Suzutsuki a lot. I think she's going to see decrease in play because of Anchorage just being better at getting that smokescreen more consistently, but don't sleep on her if you have her. Finally, Kazugumo. What can I say? We were going to run potentially Potter here, but this ship came out right as I was going to make this first update, and I had to put her in. She gets buffed by Shinano. She has a heal, which realistically won't happen too many of these battles, but it is there. And most importantly, her aviation boost is going to apply even if she dies. She's also more tanky than Potter, and I'm assuming you're going to run Juno with the Manju, so, maybe running Manju on Potter would be nice. So you could maybe run Potter here, but Kazugumo is probably the better boost, at least in this particular variant, because of Shinano. I would say the only variant to really want to give up a slot for Kazugumo would be the IJN Air Service variant, the triple carrier one with Shokaku, or maybe later Hakuryu. That is going to have a 15% damage increase on top of the 10% from the fleet command and all the fun jazz for making your airstrike immensely strong. That's it for the Shinaryuu. This was literally a tier 0 fleet for a good chunk of time and now is struggling against the new meta, but is still going to beat pretty much everything. You can definitely get Admiral of the Navy with this fleet, no problem. It's still a tier 1 fleet. Moving on, we actually have an older fleet, the Namagi fleet. This was the longest running PvP top tier fleet in the history of the game. Nagato and Amagi make such good partners. Both of them have been power crept though. So why have I put this on the list? Well, it still sees a lot of play. Amagi still has an early strike and an evasion rate boost is very nice if your opponents are running battleships. Amagi was very bad against the Shinaryuu. This fleet in particular had very bad weaknesses to Shinaryuu compositions. However, it actually does all right against Italian compositions and more specifically Mafia compositions. Aquila is not a powerhouse carrier and usually you're running 2 battleships, whether they be New Jersey, Veneto, Richelieu. Amagi's great for dodging those battleship shots. Warspite snipes are a thing again, so Amagi is really good against that. And a lot of people still love these 2 Fox girls and they're still good enough. So they make it into tier 1. We really only have 2 variants, the 2 oldest variants, Namagi-Ryu, the most common backline probably ever used. Hiru's invincible for 15 seconds. That guarantees you 2 airstrikes. That's really good. And it most likely will guarantee you 3 airstrikes unless you're going against a sniper. Namagi Nano, where we have Shinano, is for more damage on a particular airstrike. This variant is not as good in my opinion right now, but it's still seeing popular use to this day. Some things never die. However, when I come across these fleets, I'm not too scared when my Mafia fleet can just wipe the floor with them. Let's go into Vanguard options. Vanguard options are much of the same as before. We have Juno probably being your best option, Yukikaze being a great option to deal with opponents' battleships. And if you're going to be running Namagi fleet, unironically, it's because your opponent's not using many carriers. So Yukikaze is a great option here. Juno, Yukikaze, almost a must. Azuma and Noshiro, both really good options. Of course, because you're running Nagato, you have the option to run Torp memes with Noshiro and Naganami Jinsu. Sutsutsuki can be used as a counter to opponents' preloaded torps as well as Aquila. I particularly only use her if I'm running the Namagi Nano variant, but for the most part, the Vanguard options are pretty much the same as Shinaryuu. Next up, let's go with the preloaded variant, which is Aquila and Perseus. These are 2 carriers that have preloads. This means that not only can they attack early, but being that they're carriers, they can reveal enemy carriers early with their guaranteed extra bonus from being hidden and taking away all other carriers' abilities to be hidden when they launch their airstrikes. This is so powerful. This is why a preloaded carrier is so much more important than a preloaded battleship. Preloaded battleships are nice, but they don't alone make the ship good. Perseus is literally a light carrier with minuscule damage, and you're still using her because she has a preloaded airstrike. Now, we only have 2 carriers that preload, so if we want to run variants, I think you can figure out what the first variant is, and that's gonna be Richelieu. She is the best battleship that's preloaded, so that's the standard variant. Should be able to take out that Vanguard real quick, especially with Perseus and Aquila. Another variant that's not really on here because it's not particularly preloaded, but does exist, is with Warspite. Aquila and Perseus does guarantee a reveal. Certain comps out there have enough anti-air that they can prevent Aquila alone from revealing a carrier, so Perseus can come in for that double guaranteed. However, those heavy anti-air variants are particularly not that good on their own because they're so focused in anti-air, they're giving up a lot of protection against shelling damage, which Richelieu will just wipe up with. But I probably should put Warspite on this variant list, even though it's just a modern sniper variant, basically. The other variant I put on here is Independence. She's not particularly preloaded. However, she does have an early airstrike, one that puts her ahead of pretty much all the other carriers other than Akagi Kaga, which require them to be paired together, which is something we don't particularly like. So Independence being able to have an airstrike before all other carriers except Perseus and Aquila puts her in this 3rd slot. She also buffs Perseus and Aquila, making her actually really relevant here. Independence got an amazing retrofit. 4 fighters, 4 torpedo bombers, buff carriers, reload, and aviation, which means that she's also buffing Aquila and Perseus on the reload, and then an early airstrike. Absolutely amazing. So let's move into the Vanguard options. They change a little bit whether you're running Richelieu or Independence, but these Vanguard options for this section actually get to be a little bit more unique because we're so focused on killing the opponent early, particularly the opponent's Vanguard. We're looking for a Vanguard fight win very early on this preloaded, and then we can just kind of let, our Vanguard mop up the opponent's main fleet or something like that. Aurora is a great option. Aurora is going to stop those really pesky evasion builds from dodging your stuff. She's particularly more useful if you're using Shinaryuu, but she's very useful for both. Why are we going to be using Aurora over Chappie? Because Chappie does more damage, but we have so much damage coming from the back line, we don't particularly need the Vanguard to be doing a lot of the firepower damage, at least. Having Aurora gives us a little bit more versatility into light cruisers rather than just destroyers. And there are a lot of light cruisers out there. Shinaryuu and Juno being two popular options. Aurora will be enough to take those ships out. Anytime we're talking about preloaded, we have to talk about preloaded torps, because preloaded torps go perfectly with preloaded backline. If Buki has double preloaded torps, that's fantastic. She does have some other weaknesses, but if you could buff her 2 first torpedoes and then use Shinaryuu with her, you have a lot of options here. Shinaryuu, Buki, Aurora is a lot of fun, especially making sure those torps hit even against light armor. They can do quite a bit of damage if you boost up the Ibuki. Your Vanguard's not there for survivability. Of course, you can go with more traditional variants of torpedo memes. Shinaryuu does very well with Naganami and Jinsu. Everyone knows that for torp memes. You can use a Bruzy, but you aren't going to get the Veneto buff, so I particularly like Naganami, who puts more torpedoes in the water, but a Bruzy with her slow torpedoes makes them more likely to hit, so you can use the Rainbow Torps to their full potential. Shinaryuu does open up the option to use St. Louis. St. Louis is an evasion tank for the first 50 seconds. I really like St. Louis, especially if you need a little bit of survivability. It's a little bit against what this fleet's trying to do, but it is an option. Evasion tank's very good, especially if you're going against a battleship opponent, and St. Louis is tanky enough to be able to deal with carriers as well. If you're running the Independence variant or the triple carrier variant, then you can go with Kazugumo. We're gonna run her because we want her buff to apply even after she's dead. Finally, Birmingham has to be mentioned here. It might be kind of weird to run Birmingham, but if you're running Independence, you could also run Birmingham. Independence gets an additional boost if you run a Cleveland class ship. Birmingham for PvP is definitely the way to go. She has the best survivability of any of them. Cleveland's skill's not going to proc early enough. None of the other ships are really that lucrative. Birmingham does have some survivability aspects that are really nice. Of course, she is USS, so you can run a Manju. I didn't put Juno here. Of course, you can always run Juno, but Juno isn't really needed for this fleet and not particularly wanted most of the time because this fleet is focusing on killing the opponent's Vanguard really quickly. Juno doesn't really help with that. Juno helps your other ships survive longer. This is kind of an aggro min-max, like balls to the wall, take their stuff out early. Juno doesn't really contribute to that. Of course, Juno's so good you could use her here, but we're gonna take her out of the Vanguard options here just because there are many other options. Once again, these Vanguard options for all of these are not an exhaustive list. A gear would be a really good option for this too when she comes out. Torpedoes that slow the enemy are great, and that ghost gun looks very good for shredding through some of the light armor problems. I really like a gear in these preloaded comps as well. Last is we have the American variants. I particularly think these are worse than the Mafia variants where you splash in some Italian mix, but they are relevant and do pretty well. The main reason why the American faction went from nothing to really good is New Jersey. Of course, you need to run New Jersey for any American fleet. She's a requirement. And then if we're not going to be running a Acula and we want to run more Americans, Independence is a great option. I explained a lot of why she's really good in preloaded, but she is going to get damage reduction from New Jersey, which is nice. Unfortunately, she doesn't get the boost from the aviation because they're in the same fleet for PvP. But Independence is really good, and she can buff other carriers, which gives us a lot of opportunity to pick the third backline. So let's go into the variants here. Well, the first one kind of looks like a Mafia fleet. Acula is basically a tier 0 ship at this point, so the best variant is going to use Acula. The reason I put it as American instead of Mafia is because it has more American ships. Also because you're not running Veneto, you don't need to run any Italians, so Acula is the only Italian ship. You're going to be running all USS otherwise, so I'm going to call it an American fleet, but it's not pure. Acula is just too good as a tier 0 ship right now, and that's the standard variant. That's probably best. But we do have 3 options for carriers otherwise. We are going to be looking for carriers because the USS battleships outside of New Jersey right now, kind of weak sauce, waiting for another Iowa class to get better. Also, Independence will buff all of these, and New Jersey will give them a damage reduction and an anti-air boost, so survivability will be nicer. Of course, we're back to our old friend at PvP, Enterprise. I like to call this the Warrior version because, 8 seconds invincibility and double damage. never really gonna be a bad option, especially when it's buffed by independence. We could also, have some fun with getting that skill to proc early, and, Enterprise is still kicking after all these years. Essex is another variant that I really like. However, Essex is slow and she doesn't have invincibility, so you're like, why would you run her over Enterprise? Essex does have an ability to make USS ships turn aviation damage to 1 from what it would be. This is particularly useful against opponents' triple carrier versions. And since we are going to be running a very heavily USS-based faction, definitely more than 4, this skill actually puts in some work against heavy carrier opponents. Of course, when you're running against a triple battleship opponent or a single carrier opponent, this is less relevant, but she's still very good. I like Enterprise a little bit better unless the opponent is running triple carriers, but Essex is still a lot of fun in being able to get your Vanguard to survive a ton. The 4th variant's more of kind of a fun variant that I like. Bunker Hill, freedom through firepower as I like to call it. She buffs New Jersey, an extra 15% on her firepower, making New Jersey literally as strong as she can be. Independence buffs her, which is really nice. And then Bunker Hill also gets an extra set of bombers when there's another carrier in the fleet from Independence. Does trigger that, so Independence buffs her. Because Independence is there, she gets buffed, and then she buffs New Jersey. It would be nice if New Jersey could buff her for the total synergy, but this fleet's actually not too bad. I've won quite a bit of battles testing it out. It's not bad at all. I like it. It's not going to be popular, but it is there. I think you're going to need another USS battleship before this becomes widely used. Of course, also, Bunker Hill's really rare, so it's not going to ever be really widely used, but it's a fun variant that works. In terms of the options, we're going to stick basically only to USS. Why not eat up that New Jersey damage reduction? Juno is an obvious choice. Seattle, as everything that I said with the Mafia fleet before, is a fantastic all-around tank no matter what the opponent's type of damage preference is. And then we really have some options for that 3rd slot here because we aren't locked to Italians, one of the huge benefits of running a USS fleet. I can tell you right now what the option will be in 3 months, and it will be Anchorage. No questions asked. Juno, Seattle, Anchorage will be one of the tankiest Vanguards when you put them with New Jersey, and it will make this fleet a lot of fun. But let's assume that you're looking for a fleet tomorrow and you don't have Anchorage. At least at Dev 30. Well, we have like 3 USS options. Birmingham, once again, because of Independence, it's kind of simple, makes Independence get stronger. She's actually pretty survivable, which is surprising. We have Helena. Helena with a Manju item will pretty much have the opportunity to proc her skill almost every time. If her skill procs, you're probably winning that battle. And then you could always run Potter. I'm not a huge fan of this. I really like to reserve my aviation boosting ships for if I'm running triple carriers and min-maxing. Because we're running New Jersey by default, it seems like kind of a waste. But I have to put it here because even if you run like New Jersey, Enterprise, Essex, you could have some extra damage from Potter. Independence, of course, will take nice boosts from Potter. So you're going to be running at least 1 carrier in this faction, probably 2. Potter also boosts Acula if you're running Acula. And so Potter is an option here. And I really put it here to say that you're going to use Potter in this fleet, particularly over Kazagumo, which we'll use for most other variants. Potter is a USS fleet, so she gets the buffs from the USS faction. She also can equip the Manju item, but her aviation damage boost does not apply after she's dead, so you do have to be a little bit careful with that. Her other skill is also quite useful. So those are my 5 major compositions for PvP that are being used right now, as well as the different variants that people can run, as well as your options for Vanguard. Like I said, the Vanguard options is not 100% exhaustive, but we'll give you a sense of what people are running. You can certainly use tier 2 ships and do well. There will be some changes when we get to PR4, of course. A gear in Anchorage, most likely to make impacts whenever people get them done. I hope this is helpful because sometimes tier lists don't give the full story. Tier list will tell you a ship that's good and maybe why it's good, but sometimes it's the synergy between the ships that really make it. Sometimes you want to have a fleet that's good in multiple areas or have ships that cover the other one's weaknesses, such as the Mafia fleet, which is a perfect example of having the Italians and the US factions cover each other's weaknesses in in that fleet. So having fleet compositions like this, I think will give you a more practical copy paste into using in PvP rather than just a tier list. I do plan on updating the tier list, but I will probably wait a little bit until PR ships become useful. I'll update this a little bit later as well, but for the most part, the meta is going to be this for a while with a few swaps with a gear anchorage and maybe Shinaryuu. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you want more Azur Lane content, then please subscribe to the channel. And as always, take care and until next time.